and welcome to the Brian Buffini Show. I have a real treat for you in store today. This is a presentation I gave a number of years ago at our signature mastermind event in San Diego. And it was on the principles that I refer to as the Rockefeller way. Nothing much has changed in human history over thousands of years. People of great success, especially economic success, are admired on the way up and vilified after that. And John D. Rockefeller would be no exception to that. Envy and whatever mistakes a person makes when they're a person of tremendous success will always be magnified. The great principles I'm going to share with you today is of a man who grew up in a very, very less than privileged lifestyle, hard scrabbled beginning as a kid, built a prodigious business, became the wealthiest man actually in the history of America, who then left a great legacy of a family that has gone on for many generations now to become leaders, influencers, and collectively the most philanthropic family that's ever lived. They've done more good for more people than any family in history. And so I want to walk you through this process today, because one of the reasons I like this concept as we go through the Brian Buffini Show, we have the mindsets, the motivation, and the methodologies of success. We'll be able to walk through all of that today. So I have three major points for you. I'm going to talk about Rockefeller's story, and what that will share with you is his motivation. Then I'm going to share with you the 10 principles that are actually literally written in stone outside of the Rockefeller Center. And then we'll share with you the methodologies, that some of the things he did and what's happened after him, the ultimate legacy he left with through his family and what his family's done all over the world. Not a perfect man, did not live a perfect life, did not make mistakes, on occasion took advantage of the laws of the land that were there, was one of the reasons the laws of the land had to change in regards to building monopolies and things like that. But overall, I will tell you, I would gladly take, as a person, any of the criticisms that were ever leveled at John D. Rockefeller. I would be happy to have them said about me any day. So let's dive in here today. I'm going to share with you a little bit about Rockefeller's story. I'm going to share with you these 10 principles that he lived by that were ultimately his philosophy towards success, and then ultimately the benefits of that into his family. So John D. Rockefeller was born in July of 1839, long time ago. His dad was William Avery Rockefeller, and he was a con artist. He was a con artist at work, he was a con artist at home, and he was the lowest form of man, in my opinion. It was a man of no principle, no standards, no values, and not a thing anyone can count on. He was known as a traveling snake oil salesman, selling miracles and miracle remedies. They used to call him Devil Bill. He used to pose as a deaf mute in order to say how this elixir he was selling made him both be able to hear and able to talk. He not only had 5 kids, which was Rockefeller was the oldest of 5 kids, but he also had a wife, a mistress. He actually had a double life and was a bigamist and had 2 families simultaneously. So he secretly married another woman. So he's a real jewel of a man. Okay, he was a snake oil salesman that lied to people for a living, lied at home, and basically came in and out of John D. Rockefeller's life. He would show up in town after not hearing from him for 4 months. He would empty the kids' coffers. He would take whatever money his wife had made cleaning houses, and then he would take off again. And so Rockefeller grew up in an environment, and this is one of the great lessons of life, is sometimes out of your pain comes your passion. And so here was a fella that had no stability, grew up with no values from his father, grew up with tremendous instability, had to work all throughout his formative years while he was going to school. September 26th was his job day, and he got hired as an assistant bookkeeper. And for the rest of his life, he celebrated September 26th as job day, as the day that changed his life. And he considered the date more important than his birthday. He said, all my future seemed to hinge on that day. He reminisced later in life, and he said, I often tremble when I ask myself the question, what if I had not gotten that job? So he learned how to do books. He learned how to and watched how people ran businesses, and had an opportunity himself when he got into the oil business when he was a 24-year-old. And he at the time kerosene was the opportunity to light your home, and so he got into the kerosene business in 1863 when he's a 24-year-old, and actually bought into Cleveland Refinery. In 1870, just 7 years later, he formed a company that actually changed America called Standard Oil. And Standard Oil, he brought his young brothers and everyone else and raised the status of his own family and brought them all into work in the business with him. He was the guy that came to Vanderbilt, who at the time was the richest guy in the world and who owned the majority of the railroads in America, and did a deal with them to use the railroads to get kerosene oil into all the homes in America. And he was a tough businessman. He was a tough negotiator. He eventually, at one stage, controlled 90% of the refining capacity of oil in the United States, and then moved his headquarters to New York City. Now, Standard Oil became this giant company, so much so it became a conglomerate. Now, again, there's a lot of revisionist history today, and history is written by people today. There were no antitrust laws in 1863 or 1870. There were no monopoly laws. Nobody knew what that was. And so several monopolies came about, and his was one of them. Carnegie had one with steel. He had one with oil. And so eventually, Supreme Court ruled in 1911 that Standard Oil had to be broken up. And that's when it brought in place all these antitrust laws. So, you know, but it's amazing what happens when you build something significant. Standard Oil was built into 34 separate companies. And people thought, oh, this will be the ruination of Rockefeller. He now had diversification beyond what he ever had before. And so now what happened was he went from being America's first multi-millionaire to America's first billionaire. And companies that came out of separation, just a few of the companies, Exxon, Conoco, and Chevron, and Amoco, and all those companies, that all came out of the 34 companies that were part of Standard Oil. So he started with nothing and became the richest man in America. At one stage, his income was 2% of the entire American economy. It's kind of hard to fathom that type of development. What I want to talk to you about with this guy today is this guy is a guy that obviously achieved a lot, okay? And I have no desire to achieve in that same realm as Rockefeller, and you might not either. But it doesn't mean we can't learn from the principles that he laid out. And what's interesting is if you ever get to New York City and you ever get to what's called 30 Rock, so it's Rockefeller Center, it's where the NBC studios are based, it's where the famous ice skating rink is that all the tourists go to see. And what always fascinates me is every time I go to New York, I always go there, is everybody goes to 30 Rock, everybody goes to take a photograph there where the ice rink is. And yet there's very few people look around because 25 yards away from the ice rink is a stone monument. And the stone monument is a series of principles that Rockefeller attempted to live his life by, and basically lays out for himself the reasons for his success. Now, what I always find amazing is that so many people will walk by that, don't see it's there, will see the ice rink, see the building, see this, see that, know the Rockefeller name. But the man laid out for people, if you want to actually be a little bit more successful, here's his I believes. So I'm going to share with you right now, for the next few minutes, these 10 I believes. They're very, very powerful. Some of them, again, it's written almost 100 years ago. So you could say in modern sensibilities, some of them might need refinement or adjustment into today's dialogues. But similarly, I would say that every one of these principles is very applicable today in our world today to help cut through all the clutter, cut through all the noise, cut through all the social media, all the talking heads on TV, and all the people wringing their hands on the news, saying the world's coming to an end. So here's 10 principles. I have actually a copy of this hanging up in my office, and I look at it at some point in time every day, and it causes me to think through the process for myself. It's what do I believe? Here's John D. Rockefeller's I believes. Number 1, I believe in the supreme worth of the individual and in his right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pretty powerful. But I think when I think of those words, the supreme worth of the individual. So when I think about that principle, and I think about every single person that I meet, whether I'm walking around the office and meeting them, whether there's somebody staring back at me at a seminar, whether there's someone standing on a street corner with a sign in their hands, that if every person I meet, I believe, is of supreme worth, it changes me, changes my interactions. It changes how I go through my day. So the supreme worth of the individual. And then right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Well, we obviously know that's part of what America is built on. Number 2, he said, I believe that every right implies a responsibility, and every opportunity an obligation, and every possession a duty. I'm just going to say this is brilliant stuff for today. And again, we wring our hands and what's this, the society doing today, and where are we? And people will, a lot of discussions today about rights. Very little conversations today about responsibilities. Lots of people will challenge and fight for opportunity, but obligation, that's kind of a dirty word. And then every possession has a duty. Now think about that. Every possession has a duty, as opposed to the guy with the most toys wins. So every right has a responsibility. Every opportunity has an obligation. It's just brilliant stuff. And so I think about that. Like for me as an immigrant, I always want to work very hard so that my kids have opportunity. That's all. I'm not interested in my kids being guaranteed success or even what the outcome of what they do is. But I am very, very interested in fighting to give them opportunity. But with that opportunity always comes an obligation. And then as you succeed in life, every possession has a duty. That gets away from the frivolous. And that gets away from possession for possession's sake. Brilliant stuff. Principles don't change. Tactics do. This stuff was good 100 years ago. I think it's great today. The third I believe in the Rockefeller Center is I believe that the law was made for man and not man for the law. That government is the servant of the people and not their master. Okay, you know I don't cover politics on this show, but that's just a great principle. Law was made for man and not the other way around. Government is the servant of the people and not their master. And I know that's a high ideal, and I know there's people who sometimes get to Washington or wherever else in elected life, and they may even have that desire, and then bit by bit, it becomes very, very easy to understand that the concept of a public servant, that you're actually there to be served by the public. Brilliant stuff, and I think that's good stuff today. Whoever would stand on that, I'd vote for. Number 4, I believe in the dignity of labor, whether the head or the hand, that the world owes no man a living, but that it owes every man an opportunity to make a living. And again, you'll see this throughout, which is freedom with responsibility. You'll see this throughout his principles. I love the concept of the dignity of labor. Many times today, success is portrayed as the person who invents the app that sells it for $1 billion and now buys an island off in the South Pacific, and they're sitting in a hammock. The dignity of labor. There's just something very, very powerful about the actual concept of work, and there's a dignity to it for an individual, whether with the head or the hand. So whether it's a tradesman or whether it's a white-collar worker, there is no difference. There's a dignity in both of that. That the world owes no man a living, that's dealing with entitlement. And we know that that's a hot topic today, and many of the older generation will look back and hammer the millennial generation and talk about entitlement, and I believe those concepts were handed down and inherited more than they were picked up by one generation and never heard of by another. The world owes no man a living, it owes every man an opportunity to make a living. Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff. We're not entitled to anything. This is a guy that became the wealthiest man in the world, but he was thinking, hang on a second here. I celebrate the day I got the job when I was a 16-year-old. I view it that way. I remember where I came from. I remember the opportunity of my first job. The supreme right of the worth of the individual. So the people working for him, no matter what labor they're doing, whether the head or the hand. Great, great stuff. Number 5, this is, I could do a whole class on this. This is why this guy actually managed to build the fortune he built. He said, I believe that thrift is essential to well-ordered living, and that economy is a prime requisite of a sound financial structure, whether in government, business, or personal affairs. So it's a principle. Thrift. Thrift is an old word that was what we would call budgets. That's what we would call controlling our expenditures. Thrift, being having a plan, sticking to the plan, and trying to beat it by not spending more than you bring in. And whether you're a government, a business, or personal affairs, okay? Our government today, I don't care what political party anybody belongs to, it's very obvious right now with the last 4 budgets that have been passed, the last 12 budgets that have been passed in the United States, thrift is not even at the table. The last 12 consecutive budgets in the United States, we spend more than we make, the debt goes up. In your own home life, if you spend more than you make, if you put stuff on credit card, if you buy stuff you can't afford, you are not going to have well-ordered living. Simple as that. It's a prerequisite for sound financial structure. In government, in your business, income less expenses equals profit. I mean, that's the most basic statement in the world. If you know how many times I sit down with business people, or I have people who come to our company for coaching, or the boards that I sit on, where someone always has a very sophisticated reason why they're spending more than they're making. There's always a justification for it. But that thrift from the wealthiest man who ever lived says it's essential to well-ordered living. It's essential. So that's how to take care of business. Number 6, I believe truth and justice are fundamental to an enduring social order. Brilliant stuff. Truth and justice. Again, concepts today that are underneath attack. Time magazine in November of last year had on the front page, the death of truth. You know, we live in a world today where people are fake news and this and that and all that kind of stuff. What's true? And then ultimately, justice. Justice is a very, very powerful thing. And these are the things that we must hold on to for our freedoms. This is what this guy was all about. I think this stuff is powerful today. He said, I believe in the sacredness of a promise, and that a man's word should be as good as his bond, and that character, not wealth or power or position, is of supreme worth. Now, I'm going to challenge, because I hear this stuff all the time at different seminars and so on and so forth, is that some people think sequentially is that, okay, I want to become successful, I want to make money, I want to build a real estate business or a successful business, and then I'll invest, and then I'll make a lot of money, and then I'll start applying principles. Then I'll start giving, and then I'll start... Not true. This is the stuff that made this guy successful. I believe in the sacredness of a promise, that a man's word should be as good as his bond. Now, I kind of grew up with that, you know, no contracts and, you know, doing business on handshakes. The fact of the matter is that those are, you know, old terms today. But I will tell you this. I have very sophisticated business today. I have in-house, on-staff attorneys. But I can tell you something from 31 years in business. Contracts are only as good as the person that's behind them. And that the power of your good name, that is ultimately the most valuable thing you have in your business. So the wealthiest man who ever lived says that character, not wealth or power or position, is ultimately of supreme worth. These are the principles he was passing on to his kids. This is the stuff he lived by. When I share with you about this man's family and what they did and how they went on, what they went on to do, I think you'll see this, that this is probably in his family was lived out more than any other thing. I'll talk about John D. Rockefeller Jr., the greatest, biggest philanthropist in the history of the world, who was very thrifty himself, who lived within his means in his own life, and who lived within the means of the Rockefeller business and the Rockefeller Foundation, so that projection over the next 10 years is the Rockefeller Foundation will give away more money in the next 10 years than it did in the last 100, because they used the thrift principles, because they continued to let things build, because character was ultimately more powerful than wealth, power, or position. Great, great stuff. Number 8 says, I believe that the rendering of useful service is the common duty of mankind, and that only in the purifying fire of sacrifice is the dross of selfishness consumed and the greatness of the human soul set free. So this year at our mastermind event, I've been doing some research and getting ready for it, and I'm going to be encouraging people to get involved at a much deeper level in the area of service. Service as a process for really fulfilling your purpose as a human being. And it's been fascinating as I do my research. I can tell you about 100 articles that I've pulled up that are written in the last 24 months that are all about serve, and here's the benefits you get from service. Here's why you should serve and how it benefits you. Here's what happens in your life when you serve. Here's the things that happen to you. Here's the 7 ways to serve and how it helps your life. I'm over and over and over and over and over again. And it is so bleeding self-consumed, I don't even know where to start. And the dynamic of being actual sacrificing, to be selfless, to actually genuinely have a motivation with giving with no expectation of return, just the sheer joy of it, the sheer profoundness of it, what it does for a human being to serve. And today we have to package it because we have become so self-consumed as a culture. We have become the selfie culture. And we are into ourselves and what it means to me, and I do this and what the benefits are for me, and it's constant. I'm in a business that helps people grow and develop in their business and their life. I technically fall into the self-help business. I'm going to share with you the best thing about the self-help business is to get people off the self part and into the serve part. So I believe that the rendering of useful service is the common duty of mankind, and that only in the purifying sacrifice is the dross of selfishness. So think about this. This guy eventually owned steel mills. So he saw how steel got purified. You put it in the fire, and the dross was all of the ore and all of the minerals that needed to burn off, that made steel weak. And that's what got purified. And so he would have a very strong, visceral image in front of his mind of what an actual a steel plant looked like and smelt like, and that's the dross is what's burnt off. And that the purifying fire was sacrifice. Again, not words commonly thrown around today. Sacrifice, selfishness, and then service rather than being served yourself. Brilliant stuff. Number 9, he said, I believe in an all-wise and all-loving God, named by whatever name, and that the individual's highest fulfillment, greatest happiness, and widest usefulness are to be found in living in harmony with his will. Powerful stuff. Number 10, I believe that love is the greatest thing in the world, and that it alone can overcome hate. That right can and will triumph over might. Again, given the context of the time, this is a man born 25 years before the Civil War, where he came from, what he endured, the hurts and wounds he experienced in his own life, from the father background he had, fighting through, building this business, creating this dynamic, and then here are the principles that made him get there. And then he finishes up with love is the greatest thing in the world. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. And I want to share with you, this all sounds great. And again, many people go, that's great to do at the end of the life. He had these principles written down, and they were in his office from 1872, 2 years after. 2 years after he founded his company. He lived until 1937. And so for 55 years, these principles were in writing in front of him every single day. And ultimately his eye was focused on those principles, looking at those principles and trying to live up to those principles. And I guarantee he didn't live up to them every day. None of us do. But that was the goal, and that's what he was trying to do. I think those principles don't just apply to John D. Rockefeller. I think they're helpful for me, and hopefully you think they're helpful for you. The proof is in the pudding. Just a concept here as I get to this third point is I've had 3 different individuals since the start of the year who've wanted to write a book with me. And the subject matter was all about legacy. And legacy and what's a person's legacy, and Brian, what's your legacy, and all these things. And again, as I get into these discussions and have these conversations, it's amazing to me what people think that is. I think we have a tendency to way overstate what our legacy might be. For me, I told these guys, I said, my legacy is not all the people we've trained and coached and all of that stuff. My legacy is going to be played out in the lives of my family. And when I shared this repeatedly to these guys, they kind of lost interest because it wasn't too sexy for them. It sounded too basic, too fundamental. And how do you do that anyway? And two of the lads have been having trouble in that area in their life themselves. So they wanted this big, giant, uh, monumental, earth-shaking deal. Other than, um, you know, I believe if you live a good life, it'll show up in the lives of your kids. John D. Rockefeller has many generations of kids and grandkids that have come after him. And I want to share with you a little bit of it because I think principles are transferable. And so I want to share with you some of the principles that came in the persons and the kids and the grandkids that followed John D. Rockefeller. So John D. Sr., he endowed the Rockefeller Foundation. And the goal was to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world. So his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., was in charge of the business and then also in charge of the foundation. And in his lifetime, he oversaw giving away over $500 million to various philanthropic causes. Now, I just saw something recently that said what that would be in today's money, because they started doing this in 1913. So what would $100 million in 1913 be worth today? And it's billions and billions and billions of dollars that were invested. Basic things that they saw were needs around them. So one aspect would be the foundation contributed to achievements such as development of yellow fever vaccine, and basically the eradication of diseases like hookworm, which today I wouldn't even know what that is. But yellow fever was one of the biggest killers in American society. They established the medical foundation in China. They targeted specific diseases and eradicated specific diseases that could be taken on in the continent of Africa. They basically, over the course of John D. Rockefeller's Jr., became known as the greatest philanthropist in the history of the world. Brilliant stuff. And he continued to run the company. So he was the director of Standard Oil, and then later he took over U.S. Steel, which was the largest company in the world, from J.P. Morgan. So John D., they gave over $500 million. John D. Jr., $537 million. Another daughter, Abby, she created the Greenacre Foundation to maintain and operate all the parks and the state parks in New York. So if you live in New York and there's a nice park to go to, thank Abby Nelson. Okay, Nelson Rockefeller, who was John D. Jr.'s son, he became the 41st Vice President of the United States and the 49th Governor of New York, and also served as the chairman of the Rockefeller Center, which was the leading center for the arts. Okay, his brother was John D. III, and he's been on over 20 boards of various institutions, most of them in regards to foreign policy, foreign aid, and especially in the Pacific regions. Okay, and so he was awarded in 1976 the Roger Horshaw Award for the greatest public service by a private citizen. Okay, that's pretty amazing. Lawrence, who I have an affinity for, he was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for contributions to conservation and historic conservation. And the reason I have such an affinity for him is he was the guy that built the hotels in Mauna Kea, where I've lived for years. And so, but a guy that, when you talk to the local Hawaiians around Mauna Kea, they say Mr. Rockefeller knew everybody's name. He made the most exclusive club in America, right there, Mauna Kea Beach and Tennis Club on the ocean, available to the local Hawaiians. To this day, there's 3 and 4 generations of local Hawaiians that go there all the time. But when I hear the people say, oh yeah, and the doorman at the Mauna Kea will say, oh, Mr. Rockefeller was the greatest. The cooks, Mr. Rockefeller was the greatest. It was character. It was these principles that lived on. Another son was Winthrop, and he became the 37th governor of Arkansas, fought in World War II, won a Bronze Star, and he founded the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. And again, that was to do with helping people in Arkansas, farming, underprivileged kids, the whole thing. Jay, who was, again, John D. III, he worked in the Peace Corps with John F. Kennedy, became a senator and the governor of West Virginia. Rodman, who was the great-grandson of a great-great-grandson of John D. He was vice president and chief executive of the International Basic Economy Corporation. Did great work overseas, prestigious decorations from the Mexican government, worked in the Rockefeller organization, worked in the memorial foundations and museums of modern art, and so on and so forth. Winthrop Jr., his son, was the 13th Lieutenant Governor of Arkansas. And again, still to this day involved in the Rockefellers, still one of the wealthiest men in the world, and he's four generations removed from John D. And yet one of the largest philanthropists in the world. Now, you may be sitting here going, what in the world? I didn't want to know all that stuff about all those people. And you may not have, and that's okay. But when people want to talk about legacy, to me, that's a hell of a legacy. To me, that's a life well lived. Perfect? No. Your life? My life? Nope. But this guy established a series of I believes that he had tried to live by every single day of his life. And the legacy of that was he taught those to his children, who in turn told them to his children, and then their children's children. I had a neat opportunity here recently. My folks came into town, Beverly's folks came into town, and we had a photograph taken with 4 generations. So here's a great-grandfather, a grandfather, which is me. Can't believe that. My father, my son, and then his boy. And so my mind's been on this stuff. So I saw that lived out in my own life here very recently. I'm going to share with you a life well lived is a life where your values are translated into those who come after you and those who come after them. So it's not so much important what Rockefeller's I believes were as much as it is what are yours? What are your I believes? What is it you value? Have you ever taken 5 minutes to think of them? Have you ever sat down and thought, what is it I believe? What is it I want to adhere to every single day? What is it I'd like to pass on to someone after me? And so I've actually, in my own life, come up with some I believes in each area of my life, in my financial circle, in the family circle, those kinds of things. And also, a few years ago when we taught this at Mastermind, people just loved it. And we created a handout where people could post this in their office. And they were Rockefeller's I believes. And so I have this hanging up in my office. I look at it all the time. And the team here thought you might like a copy of this as well. So if you'd like one of these, go to thebrianbuffinishow.com and you can download the Rockefeller I believes, post them up, print it up on a nice cardstock and put it where you can see it every day. Maybe it'll inspire you to come up with your own I believes, that here's the values you believe in that you're trying to work towards every day. And maybe it'll be something that will inspire you. Maybe it'll be something that inspires the people who come after you. And before I get to a very special closing of our show today, I believe our producer, Mr. David Lally, he has a special message for you.
Thanks, Brian. Hey guys, I don't know if you've heard about our Buffini Insiders, but if not, make sure you head over to thebrianbuffinishow.com where you'll get behind the scenes and exclusive content just for you. Again, thebrianbuffinishow.com. Head over, become a Buffini Insider today.
Thanks, David. Before I let you go, I really enjoy hearing from you folks on all the different reviews you write, as well as emails and letters I'm receiving. I'll pick out a couple here that I enjoyed. Natalie Winter just said, Brian, I just listened to your podcast with the legend Brian Tracy, and oh my gosh, great golden nuggets. I'm on my 3rd full page of notes. Thank you. And Natalie, I'm glad you enjoyed that. And certainly that was a favorite day of mine, hanging with the legend, Mr. Tracy. Here's Mary Nacaretto, and she says, hi, Brian, I just finished listening to part 2 of How to Make It Big in America. How fortunate we are with all kinds of opportunity that surrounds us. I now have an appetite to explore my grandparents emigrating to Canada from Italy. What a journey it must have been for them. Not just miles, but the emotions of leaving your birth country and family, all in the hope of giving your kids a better life. I wish I was able to ask them what it was like and to tell them how grateful I am for them. Well, that's very apropos for today's show. So I have a special treat for you. I always like to end the show with the Irish blessing. But I had a pop-by today. My mom and dad were in town, and my dad, for the first time in 86 years, recorded something on vinyl, and we got it down. And so today I have a special treat for you. is my dad is going to give you the Irish blessing instead of me. And remember, if you enjoy the Brian Buffini Show, please tell your friends about it. We'd love to help them.
May the road rise up to meet you, and may the wind always be at your back. May the rain fall soft upon your fields, and the sun shine warm upon your face. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand.